Hey everyone, this is Jesse here with Chaos Tones. Hope you're all doing really well. So today I'd like to talk to you about Deviant Drums version 1.0.2 that just came out today. You can see here that this is version 1.0.2 for sure. And the build date is January 1st, 2025. I know it's January 15th, but it takes a little while for these things to come out. And so I figured I'd do a brand new overview. I know I already have an overview for Deviant Drums, but over the last few months, I've spent a considerable amount of time adding new controls, adding new features, and just streamlining some certain things. Now, everything's in the same place. Some of that streamlining is behind the scenes stuff that you'll never ever notice, but it's there anyway. And I'm not really going to talk about too much of that stuff. I want to get down to all the details of things and how you use Deviant Drums and where all the controls are, what they all do. And so that's what I'm going to spend my time doing today, making a video for you so that you know where everything is at. So let's just go ahead and start with the navigation bar that's right up here. This is the drum view. This is the first thing you see when you start up Deviant Drums. Okay, pretty obvious. This is the drum mixer. This is the cymbal mixer. This is the quick menu. I know I used to call it the quick menu. I still call it the quick menu, but it's just not labeled as such anymore. I used to. I still do, but I used to too. This is the mapping page, right? A lot of enhancements came to the mapping page. And now we have comprehensive velocity control for every drum and group controls too. Hey, how about it? And of course, you can come over here and see that you're on version 1.0.2 for sure. This is the info if you are so interested in that kind of thing. Let's come right back to where it all begins, the drum view. This is the first thing you see when you start up Deviant Drums. And let's just start from the top and work our way on down. So we have drop downs for every cymbal, of course. We have drop downs for every drum, of course. Here's the snare list. Everybody likes a snare list. And so that's not breaking the internet or anything like that. Those are pretty standard features. What is pretty nice is the quick controls. So you can hit a drum. That populates the quick controls for that particular drum. And so going from left to right, we can see that the identifier for the drum itself. Now we're on kick. Now we're on tom 5. Now we're on tom 3, and so on and so forth. So this shows you the quick controls for the drum that you're on. This is the smash button for whatever drum we're on. And so if we're on tom 3. Just so you can hear what that's actually doing. This is the volume control for that drum. Close, overhead, rooms, we have those for every drum and every cymbal. This is your treble knob for every drum. This is your attack, sustain. This is for a transient designer that's built in the mixer. You'll see that later. This is your reverb control and your tune knob for whatever drum you have picked. All right, so, okay, and now we have a tom link too. So this is brand new. This is a very nice thing. So if you want to change all your controls for all the toms all at once. So if you want brighter toms, well, great. And you see now that I've highlighted all the drums, all the bright controls have been amended, and so on and so forth. So tom link is really nice. And that's a new feature that we have now. So really nice. I really like tom link. That pretty much does it for drum view. We can move on over to drum mixer. All right. We have tune. We have close mic, overhead mic, and room mic. And those correspond to, of course, these over here. And we have solos and mutes for each channel respectively. Right. So there's a lot of control there. And we have that for every drum. On every channel. So if we move on down, we have the menu, same menu as the drop downs that are over here. So you can select whatever drum you want over there. So that you don't even have to work from this menu. You can work from whatever menu you want. Whatever page you want. We have the smash button here, same smash button as was over on the quick controls. We have pan ability per drum. We have fader. If we shift click any of these, we can move these controls on a more finite scale. Okay, real nice to be able to do if you want more detailed movement of things. That's all detailed in the manual, by the way. If none of this makes sense, well, then you can go to the manual and you can double check my work. All right, moving on down, we have mute, we have solo, and we have a default control. Nothing's been changed, but if I come over here and say do all this, let's move everything. If I hit default, well, everything except for these changes back to default. Okay, so very nice. If I click this, the label for that particular drum, up pops a whole set of controls. This is your EQ. You got trim and on off also. And we have the ability to change your transient shape. So we have attack, we have sustain, we have reverb, and we have a tone shifter. I call it a frequency shifter. It just changes the tone of your drum just a little bit. So it can be real handy if you want a warmer sound. Nice stuff. And then if we come down just a little bit farther, we have some controls that a lot of us are familiar with. But if you're a power user, as I like to call it, come over here and route all channels to sequential outputs, and then everything gets routed to sequential outputs. So you can route your kick and snare and tom 2 and tom 3 all to different outputs in your DAW or your interface or whatever it is you want. And you can do that. You don't have to do it sequentially. You can just say, hey, I want tom 5 or whatever I'm on, tom 3 to go to stereo 10. It's a whole thing. By the way, this red light here, it sets everything back to default, and it also tells you if you've made any changes to any controls in this hidden menu for any of the drums. It's true for all the drums, right? So you have made changes to this, or I have made changes to this page, and so I can click this, set everything back to default. We can see that very clearly, and that's true for all these controls. So we can see, bam, back to default. And if it's all back to default, then this light is not lit up, and we'll be able to see that very clearly and very easily. All right, moving on. The EDM channel is a little bit different. You can tune your drums here, of course. This is your bass drum, BD. This is your snare drum, SD. This is a channel that I'll let you figure out. And you have solo and mute, respectively. You can come in here and change whatever drum sound you'd like it to be, of course. So if I come over to EDM and I want EDM 5, then I can see that EDM kick 5 and EDM snare 5 have been changed to represent that. EDM 9, same thing, so on and so forth. I prefer to tune right here instead of out here because it's just a better control mechanism. I can tune the kicks down and tune the snare up and so on and so forth. I could do it differently if I want, or I could change none of them at all. It's also worth noting that any change you do to the snare will also affect the kick and vice versa. Same with the transient shape and reverb. That's because they're all going to the same channel strip output. All right. The smash button is a little bit different. It applies a distortion and a low pass filter to the kick drum specifically, or the bass drum specifically, so that you get a different tonality out of the bass drums if you want. This can be really helpful and really fun for just making different tonalities. So anything we can do to be different, I'm for it. Of course, we still have the mute, we still have solo, and we still have default. Okay. Hope all that makes sense. We can come over here to the drums. I call these the VCA channels. I don't know if that's accurate or not. But if I come over here to tune and I amend that, you can see that all these changed. And what's nice about this VCA control over here is that everything changes in relation to everything else. So if I come down, you can see that everything moves in relation to everything else. It doesn't snap every control to where everything else is or was. I hope that makes sense. And you have that same level of control for everything else. Faders too. Pans too. All right. And because that can get real fiddly if we allow it to, we can just come over here and set everything back to default. These are default controls, and they are red to denote that they are, in fact, default controls. Right? Okay. And if we come down a little bit farther, we've made changes to this fader here. But if we don't want those changes to be this way, we want them back to default, we can hit F for default, for fader default, fader, F, fader default. That's how you can remember that. Or we can hit the D for default, and this defaults every control on the mixer for the drums back to default. In case we hate everything that we are. And this is getting ahead of myself here for a second. We can also group control do changes here. So if we want all our drums to be brighter or have more attack or be more reverberated, then this will apply, all these changes will apply to every drum throughout the mixer. Not the cymbals, because we're only affecting the drums, but you can see that all these are the same as I click around. You can see that this changes to represent tom 3, tom 4, tom 5, and all these controls are the same. But I could go back and change that. And you can see those controls change because, well, because I changed them. And you could do that too. And this is a really great way of getting extra tonality and extra value out of this instrument. I just wanted to have as much value built into this instrument as absolutely possible. So I filled the dang thing up with features. Okay, and then if we want to go back to default, just bam, everything went back to default for every drum. Every control in the hidden menu for every drum went back to default with this click of a button. All right, and the same as all those controls are true for the cymbals. I could show you that real quick. Come over here to cymbals, and all those controls have been changed, and I can set them back to default here, just like that. This is really helpful if I have a mix that I like and maybe the cymbals are too present. I'll just pull down these close mics or bring up the room mics or bring all the cymbals down all together. And that can be really, really, really helpful because you can do that all from one menu. And one of the reasons that's really helpful is because graphically, we don't have enough space in Contact to be able to have every control on one page. So, instead of toggling through menus or pages or whatever you want to call them, we can just do a lot of that work here. All right, anyway, if we want to set those back to default, we just come down to the cymbals label. We can click on that and we have a different look for this because these are the controls for all the cymbals. I made sure that the color code was a little bit different so that you knew you were working on cymbals instead. All right, and we got reverb and we got a tape saturator for cymbals. Gone is the transient designer because transient designer on these cymbals didn't really work. Not to say that it wouldn't work, but it just, for these cymbals, it didn't. And there's more value with the tape saturator for us than there is with the transient designer on these cymbals. So anyway, that's it for that. Set all those controls back to default. Come over to Cymbal Mixer, and we're already familiar with most of this stuff. In fact, I didn't come over here and do this, but you can see that. Okay, so I like to think of this smash button as a button that works as a bright control for the cymbals, because that's what it is. It's not. Let me back up on that. So for all the drums, if we're over here and we're using the smash button for the drums, that is applying a parallel compression and a distortion, clipping mechanism for the drums. The cymbals don't do that. The cymbals are using a high boost, and so you change the voicing of the cymbals with this button here. So if you want it brighter, on. If you want it darker, off. All right, one thing to note is that if we come over here and we change any of the values in the cymbals, then those values will reflect any of the cymbals that you would choose over here, because it's all the cymbals are linked to each other. And kind of didn't see a need to be able to change just the top end of the hi-hats by itself and maybe the splash cymbals by themselves. So all the cymbals are one group of controls for the hidden controls, that is. All right, so I hope that makes sense. Aside from that, everything in the cymbal mixer is basically the same. We have our menus here to choose the cymbals, and there is one difference between the cymbal mixer and the drum mixer, and that's that the chinas and the splashes are partially linked. So if let's see what is linked, because I actually can't remember right now. This is linked. Yeah. Pans aren't. Faders aren't. But these controls are linked. So if you solo China 1, you're going to solo China 2. If you mute China 1, you're going to mute China 2. And so on and so forth, because those are linked. And so are the outputs, obviously, because you can't click on these. This is just a symptom of me having little bit too much ambition. And so it is what it is. By the way, you can command and click and it sets everything back to default. Or you can just click that and it goes back to default. Yeah, so one thing to note is that we don't have the VCA adjustment on the cymbals mixer page. And so to alleviate that issue, you can option click and you can batch move whatever you want. Batch move or group move, however you want to say it. Right, so all I'm doing is option clicking and everything moves together. If you're on a Windows computer, then I believe that's an Alt. So there's that. All right. All right, let's move on. This is the quick menu. So where you are in this instrument, you can make changes to the quick menu. And that means that if you have a preset that you like, let's just go with that. And we're looking at, this has a combination of multiple different drums. Well, I can come over here and decide I want the DW kit instead, and now the DW kit is populated. Or if I want the Ghost kit, so on and so forth. And if I decide I want to do that over here, I can do that. And that change is made here. Doesn't matter where you are in the instrument, you can make changes to those controls very easily, very quickly. It's just a workflow thing, and I love being able to have access to that stuff really quickly, really easily. It's very helpful. You can also change the cymbals with the cymbal presets. I've also built in mix presets, so you can come over here and say, well, I want this different mix preset. I say mix preset. What I mean is master presets, because really what we're looking at is these controls right here. Nothing inside of the mixer to the left-hand side of the master controls will be amended. It's all in this region right here. So you have a few different parameters that get adjusted here. If you decide you want to save a preset because you like that preset and you want to load that up at a later date, well, then you can do that. Okay. Those are things that you can do from anywhere in this instrument, and it's really handy. One other thing, though, is that it was a bummer that you could only link toms over here. So I thought, well, I want to be able to do that, but I ran out of space to put that control anywhere in this mixer. It just wouldn't fit anywhere. So in order to thwart that, I figured, well, you can come to this menu and I can link and unlink toms right here. And now all the controls for the toms are linked. Even if I come over here, I can see that I've made this change to Tom 4, well, if I come over here, I can see that the change has been made to Tom 1 too. Everything you do once the toms are linked to one tom will happen to every tom, just so that you can make really, really quick snap decisions and you don't have to worry about little finite changes. I found myself being kind of annoyed that I had to do so many different changes. So I made sure that this was an option for us, because if I'm annoyed by the thing that I made, you will be too. Anyway, so let's move on. Here's the mapping page. So let's start with hitting a key. You're going to see that whatever key that I press, it will be denoted by the identifier that's just to the right of it. So if I can see that this is, right, we got 4 kicks. If I want to change the mapping by learning it, I can decide, well, there's nothing on this key. I can press this key. You can see me pressing this key because because I'm pressing this key, and this shows you that I'm pressing that key. Otherwise, you wouldn't know, because nothing's mapped to it. But something's about to be mapped to it. This is about to be mapped to it. So you press this, it lights up for 10 seconds, by the way. It only lights up for 10 seconds. If I sit here and talk for 10 seconds, easy for me to say. If I sit here and talk for 10 seconds, there it is. It goes away. So it gives you the opportunity to learn that. If I don't want that, I'll just learn the next one over. So you press the key, it lights up, and just like it did before, this is not a new feature. I don't want this mapped at all to anything. I can just say, get out of here, and it just goes away. Nice. Now, there's a couple ways to come back. We can just grab this, click, grab, and bring it down. And for one reason, it will not duplicate map. So right now we're on C-2. You can see this thing going kind of wild down here. That's because it will refuse to map to a similar key that something else is on. Let me come back over here and map this to C4. Okay. As soon as we are hovering over the number and letter of the note, we can see that these arrows pop up. I can change the mapping with these arrows also. So there we go. We can see down here that this is changing. We can see the number and letter changing. And what happens if I come down one more? We're on B3 right now. It goes to G#3. If I come down one more, we've gone to C3. That's because these are populated with something. And I can see that the next one's going to be way over here. Yep. So I hope that makes sense. This will intelligently find the next key that's available and map to that. And if you decide to map to, let's say I try to map kick 4 to snare drum. Denied. It just doesn't do anything. It won't go anywhere, right? So this is true for every drum. We can come in here and just decide we don't want any kicks, you madman, you. And so now these kicks, they gone. We could bring them back. All right, enough of that. If I come over here and shift from monophonic drum mapper to polyphonic drum mapper, then I can duplicate things. Decide that I want to have some fun here, and I told you I wasn't going to play too much, but I have to showcase this. If I want, say, this key switch on this kick drum, let's say. There we go. So if that's something you're interested in doing, or stacking multiple drums, wherever it is you want to go, you can do that. So the polyphonic drum mapper lets you do some pretty wild things. If I decide that I want to just go ahead and be totally egregious and ridiculous with this kind of idea, well then you can't stop me. If that's what you're interested in doing and exploring some fairly ridiculous things, then go for it. There's nothing to stop you. That happens inside of the polyphonic mapper, so you guys have fun. All right. So now that I've ruined everything, I can just come back to my default mapping, and there it is. We have a bunch of maps here that are built in, but if it's not exactly to your specifications, you can save your map and you can load your map and it'll show up in custom, and you can toggle between everything and it'll stay in your custom map. So that's just a nice feature. Oh, you can also just type in the value that you want, by the way. So if I don't want B0, if I want B1, well, B1 was unavailable. So because we're on monophonic drum mapper, to the next available key. So there you go. It worked. Let's move on then. So we have the velocities page. So we have control over the velocities of all the drums. If I decide that I have too much dynamic control over the kick, I can take the low level and bring it up. Though with the velocity control, you have one dial that amends your low level dynamics and another one that amends your high level dynamics. So you can say, hey, I want all my kick dynamics to be just 127. And then it doesn't matter how hard I hit a key or a drum, the velocity will always be 127. And the adverse is true. If I bring this down, everything, you can't hear it because the samples were recorded so low. But you probably won't need to do anything like that. But now my velocities for the kick drum are limited to 71. Now even if I hit louder than 71, they're limited to this. So that gives you a pretty good level of control for every drum. And if you want, you can come over here to this and you can limit all the controls and you can group move everything all at once. And then you can still come over here and say, hey, well, I want to fine tune that, and you can do that. All right. So that's the velocities. You can have some fun with that. By the way, one thing to note is that for Deviant Drums, things were recorded with the most insanely loud hits possible. Sometimes it's to our benefit to actually bring this down somewhere around 110 so that if you want a more tame rock sound, maybe that's something that's interesting to you. All right. I'm going to get to these controls in just a second when we start talking about the key switches, because these are, you can see it right here. It says key switch trim. Now, we have the EDM unison button. I'm going to go over this again. Again, meaning for the first time. So by default, the acoustic kicks are in unison with the EDM bass drums. So if I don't have this muted, by default it is muted, then we're going to hear the EDM kicks stacked with the kick drums. If I turn this off, that's no longer true, and we can see that EDM is no longer being triggered. And that's similar with the snare too. If I turn this back on, now we can see it's triggered anytime I press kick or snare, right? So this is really handy if you want to thicken your drum sound up with the electronic drum sounds that I've built in. Now you can still access those sounds on these controls over here. So that's the EDM unison portion. Now let's look at the key switches. The key switches, there's two different key switch types. There's momentary and maintained. Maintained is kind of like a light switch that's either on or off, and momentary works while the key is pressed down. So if I come all the way down to where the key switches are and I hold this key down, we'll see that space lights up, but only as the key is down. You can see it right here too, right? And that's for all 4 of these key switches. Or I can go to maintained and I can see based on this right here that's telling you when I press the key that this turns on like a light switch only when I press it on, off, on, off. So that can be really helpful for sound design purposes. I come down here, we have a brutality knob, and this changes the tonality of these 4 key switches. So if you want them to be more brutal, basically, then you can change this. I told you I'd come back to these. I've got these key switch trim modifiers so that if you decide you want to change the response of these key switches and you're not getting what you want out of the brutality knob, you can come over here and make additional changes to these key switches. Okay, and then there's 3 other key switches that you can see over here. There's random snare, random kick, and random cymbal. So I think you can understand what those do. The time you hit them, give you a random snare or a random kick or a random sim. Earlier versions of Deviant Drums, these didn't update the menus, but now they do. So this is a really handy feature because now if I decide I want to change the snare drum, well, now I can go through and I can randomize that and I can just scroll through until I find the drum that I like. Let's say I like that drum. Well, what is that drum? Okay, that's the Canopus medium open tuned snare. And so now I know that and I can use that. And we can see it change right there. And that's a really handy way of finding and auditioning new sounds that we can have more creativity. And the same will be true if we decide to change the kick drum or the cymbals. All right, so there's that. It's just a handy way of finding new sounds. Now, one last thing. We have the memory manager down here, and it used to be labeled memory manager. It's not anymore, but I figured it was pretty self-explanatory. All loaded means all the samples are loaded. If I come over here to this I can see that this particular kit is taking 2.36 gigabytes of RAM right now. But if I click this, the kit that I have loaded in right now is left in RAM, and everything else is purged from RAM, meaning the entire kit that we have, cymbals and drums, is only 264 megabytes. And this is really handy for those of us that have weaker laptops, no offense, or older laptops or laptops that have less RAM available. So you won't have access, when you do this, you won't have access to random snare, random kick, and random sim, but the trade-off is that you're utilizing a whole lot less RAM. So whatever you need, whatever you would like to use, however you like to use it, we've got it built in for you. And so that basically shows you all the features of Deviant Drums. If I missed anything, I apologize. I'm hoping y'all have some fun with this, because I definitely do. And that, I think that does it for this. All right, I'll catch you on the next one, guys. See you later.